This week, President Joe Biden proposed a set of reforms to the Supreme Court. The announcement comes after banner years for the court. In just the past few years, the court has overturned Roe v. Wade, reversed decades' standing of affirmative action, held that the court will no longer defer to government experts dedicated to food and drug safety, to environmental protection, and ruled that while presidents can be kings, people without homes can be jailed if they're caught sleeping outside. And that doesn't even touch on the alleged corruption seeping into the court itself. Biden's proposals include instituting term limits for the justices, a binding code of ethics, and a constitutional amendment that would overturn the court's recent decision granting legal immunity to presidents. But some question whether these reforms go far enough, or if they have any chance of being enacted at all. Joining me from Pennsylvania to discuss the state of the Supreme Court is Sarah Lipton-Lubet, the executive director of Take Back the Court, and here in the studio, Wajahat Ali, author of the Left Hook Substack and columnist for the Daily Beast. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
So Sarah, I want to turn to you first just to get your initial reaction to these proposed reforms, just on principle and also what your thoughts are on the chances of them coming to fruition.
First, President Biden, he is really the institutionalist's institutionalist, right? I mean, what it took for him to overcome his desire to kind of just uphold institutions as they are is tremendous. And what moved that is just the absolute off the rails, unhinged decisions from a corrupt set of Republican justices that we just can't ignore anymore.
And Waj, how do you feel? Do you feel similarly?
Yeah, I think you have to give credit to President Biden in making the shift because, as Sarah said, he's the institutionalist. He's the one who, for years, progressives have been saying, you have to do this. You're dealing with a right-wing authoritarian movement. They've packed the courts. And when he had the majority a few years ago, we're like, for the love of God, do it now. And they slow-walked it. And then finally now that, he's not running again, I've told him to just be as bold as he wants. And he realizes that for the sake of our democracy, for the sake of protecting the institution of the Supreme Court, he has to make this decision. So for him, of all people, to come out with this three-point plan, which is what so many progressives, so many people who have been interested in protecting the integrity of the court have been saying for years, is huge. We have to give him credit. At the same time, this is not a knock on President Biden. He can be even a bit more bold. Some people say, oh, well, this is just them doing a Hail Mary pass. There's no way this'll go through. You have the Republicans controlling the House and you have the filibuster. Yes. We could talk about the problems of actually implementing this vision. But things were impossible before they became possible. I'll give you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, people said, a black woman running for president, America will never accept it. And then they saw the reality. I am old enough, Prem, because you're young, much younger and much more handsome than Mehdi. I remember it was President Obama, the first term, who said, no, I'm against marriage equality, and now it's the norm. Same thing with fighting for a living wage. So you prime the people for this. And you can prime the people for this because it's the lowest public approval rating for the Supreme Court that we've seen. And secondly, the Supreme Court has, as the kids say, gone ham against our rights. And furthermore, I think that the final nail was this President versus Trump absolute immunity ruling, which many of us were like, even this conservative court, it won't give a carte blanche to President Trump. And they just created out of thin air, essentially a gift wrap present to President Trump to escape any and all accountability. And that, on top of overturning Roe v. Wade, on top of the corruption that I'm sure we'll talk about, on top of Martha Ann Alito raising the two flags that are associated with violent insurrectionists, I think the majority says enough is enough. We can't deal with these people. We need some bold reform. And the fact that President Biden does this is a huge opening for Democrats.
Yeah. And Sarah, Waj gets to an interesting point about the impact of messaging, the impact of expressive function of the executive. And one thing that people, maybe some critics, and even some believers are wondering is that could this have come sooner? That perhaps the narrative surrounding these proposals has less teeth when it's 100 some days before an election than it would have, for instance, in response to any of the array of unpopular decisions that we're talking about here, to the massive pile of exhibited perceived corruption seen, for example, in Justice Thomas's lavish gifts and luxury vacations from Harlan Crow. What are your thoughts on this timing? Could it have come any sooner? And if it had, would that have perhaps changed the messaging around this?
Look, do I wish that this was on the day one agenda in 2021? Yes. If it were, I think we'd be in a very different place right now. That said, we are where we are, and I'm looking forward. And I think something that's really important to note is it took Vice President Harris a hot second to come out and endorse these reforms. And she did so from the campaign side. And I think that's something that we are seeing a lot of all across the country are candidates understanding that the people are beyond fed up with being ruled by these oligarchs in robes sitting on the court trying to control our lives, our families, our bodies, and taking that head on. It's the right policy and it's the right politics.
Yeah, I definitely hear you, Sarah. And I want to get back to the substance of these proposals in a moment. But Wajahat, she actually brings up a very good point that I wanted to talk about, which is there's the structural challenge of getting these reforms to pass. And many people see these actually as a baseline for what the courts should really be doing, or how we should be modifying, adapting, changing, evolving the court. But Sarah gets to a good point that Kamala Harris has very quickly endorsed these reforms, instituted this as a part of her campaign. And I'm wondering how you perhaps see how the Harris campaign could advance this agenda meaningfully beyond just this moment in time that Biden's announcing it, in such a way that it not only becomes a mobilizing force for the Democratic campaign, but perhaps actually convinces non-Democratic voters to see the seriousness of this too.
Well, the thing is, she has the polls on her side, because when it comes to these three reforms, the overwhelming majority of people polled say, yeah, that makes sense. About 3/4 of Americans are like, yes, term limits. These are oligarchs in black robes who literally sit there until death or immobility. Why? Presidents serve 4 years, senators serve 6 years, House of Representatives serve 2 years. Why do these people sit here for lifetime appointment? Number one. Number two, when it comes to code of ethics, especially with the avalanche of corruption allegations, the lavish gifts, the yachts on the yacht trips on Clarence Thomas, right, and also Samuel Alito, and the fact that their spouses, respectively, supported the violent insurrection, people are like, yeah, why isn't there a binding code of ethics on the highest judiciary in the land? So she already has the public opinion. We're talking about 70 to 75% of Americans are already on board. Strategically, Prem, what we're talking about, the reason why this is so good for Harris, especially as he campaigns, is I've said for years now, you should campaign on reforming the Supreme Court. Think about all the people in the middle. Think about galvanizing the base. Politics is all about addition. And if I was a Democrat, I would say the next president will most likely choose 2 Supreme Court justices, because we've got Thomas and Alito in their 70s. Look what this current Supreme Court has done. Look what they've said. And don't you want reform? So in order for me to implement this vision, we need to get the presidency, maintain the Senate, and get the House. And that, it's not just for Harris. That's what I want Democrats to be bold about this. It is a galvanizing force for a top-down ticket. You get all 3. And if you get all 3, then I would say, take out the filibuster, go for a slim majority, put this into action, and now you can save a generation. Because otherwise, what you tell people is, these folks will sit here for decades and take away our rights. And I think that, especially with Roe, especially with Dobbs, especially with Donald Trump, who said he'll be dictator, but only for a day, you better believe women are paying attention, and you better believe that a majority of people will come out. Even if they're on the fence, they'll be like, I'll go for Harris. Galvanize on this issue.
Got it. And so, Sarah, going back to some of the substance itself, I know Wajahat gets to certain ways to maneuver and navigate around some of these challenges, but nevertheless they exist. There's the challenges of the fact that for a constitutional amendment that requires 2/3 approval in both houses of Congress, it requires ratification by 3/4 of the state legislatures. A code of conduct, while is something that seems very intuitive and natural, in some ways, these justices should already be held up by certain standards, whether it's by other branches of government, whether it's by the Senate Judiciary Committee. How do you respond to these concerns of these things coming to fruition, the enforceability of things like a code of conduct? How do you respond to that?
So I think what we were just talking about in terms of the power of putting these solutions on the table in a serious way is that one of the major blocks we've had to date in the court reform movement, and I should say, Take Back the Court has been working on court reform since 2018, and very few folks wanted to be in the trenches with us then. So this movement has come so far. But one of the big blocks was just getting rid of that inertia that said this isn't something that we can change, right? This is static. The court is handed down from on high, and there's nothing that we can do. And what we see now with the proposals from President Biden and all of the energy around this and around pushing back against decisions banning abortion and making the president a dictator. What we see is people now understand that change is possible. And that truly, I think, was the biggest barrier. And so now that we've crossed that, now that that dam has broken, we're gonna figure out how to get it done, what the details are, and how to put that in place. Now, in respect to, I think, some of the particular questions you asked, how can we make a code of ethics enforceable when these justices act like they are accountable to no one, when they act like they rule us as opposed to being public servants? Um, it, it shows us that we need the other branches to step in, and that we know the justices are not going to police themselves. All of this nonsense about Justice Roberts cares about the institution and he's going to, right? That is out the window. And I think everybody understands that now. And look, they came out with this kind of fake ethics code guidelines thing that the justices put out themselves a few months ago. And they're not even abiding by those rules that they set out themselves. So it's clear that we need an ethics code, that we need an ethics code that has enforcement mechanisms, and we need to just keep pushing.
Yeah. And I mean, to your point, Sarah, Justice Alito has called such an enforceable code unconstitutional. So, Wajahat, I'd be curious, how do we deal with this when we have other branches of government? I mean, you talk about me being young. I mean, just a handful of years ago, I was in class learning that, we have 3 branches of government for a reason, to hold them accountable. But it seems that is just not the case. So how does that change?
Well, it's a rogue court. It's a rogue court that exists purely to implement the bro-oligarchy's vision of a white Christian nationalist utopia. And you say, well, Wajahat, you're being so radical and extreme in saying this. And I give you the fact that Martha Ann Alito has refused to apologize for, on 2 separate occasions, hoisting 2 flags of white Christian nationalists and violent insurrectionists. And I also give you the example of Justice Thomas and his wife, Ginny Thomas, sending text messages to Mark Meadows during the January 6th insurrection, supporting it. And I give you the examples of Justice Thomas saying, oops, yeah, sorry, forgot to tell you about the millions of dollars lavished upon me to present them this beautiful case where I will deregulate industries by overturning Chevron, right? And then I think Sarah said a very good point, and I'm so glad that this will finally be the nail in the coffin of this zombie narrative that Justice Roberts is a moderate. He is not a moderate. If you thought there were any moderates left, I give you Trump versus United States, where 6-3 decision, all the conservatives said, Trump, go forth and be a dictator. We give you absolute immunity for official acts. And I think finally that is the final nail in the coffin for people like Biden who slow walk this. Look, I always say Republicans bring a bazooka to a knife fight. Democrats bring in an eraser and erase themselves. And then they punch themselves in the face. And finally, I think the groundswell says, Democrats, we've elected you. For the love of God, do something. And to give credit where credit's due, there is a Judiciary Act that has been supported by a number of leading Republicans. Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island has been on, and Elizabeth Warren, who've been saying, we need, wait for it, expansion of the court. We need 4 more justices. We need these reforms. And you have all these organizations. I think now it's 130 plus. Sarah would know better. She's been taking count of it, of these grassroots organizations who are all for it. So now I know we keep saying this, but it's so important. You have to give the vision to people. You have to tell the story. You have to tell them this is possible. And then once they see that, they go, that makes sense. These 3 proposals how come no one's done this before? And then you galvanize people, especially 3 months before an election, and you say, we need the presidency, we need the Senate, and we need the House, and then we can implement this. It is enforceable.
To that point, I guess I'm curious, because I think we've spoken to and around this basic question of what could a simple Democratic majority do right away on day one if Democrats get a majority, a simple majority? Because a lot of these, we talk about the thresholds of 2/3, 3/4 state legislature, but there does evidently seem to be things that a Democratic simple majority can do that would either enact lasting change or challenge Republicans to then, to your point, Waj, then have to go against public opinion in trying to take those things back. I think it was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz who said, the point of political capital is to use it, not to let it burn away. And so if Democrats get the political capital on day one and get the majority after they ask the American people to deliver it to them, what can they do? Sarah, I'd love to start with you.
On day one, they can expand the court. They can restore balance and integrity to the court by adding seats to disempower the rogue justices that don't think that they work for the American people. And this is why. Look, you got to take on the filibuster. We know that for anything that progressives and liberals and moderates and anyone wants to do for any progress going forward, we've got to take that on. And if you expand the court, you disempower the justices that are standing in the way of democracy. And if you impose term limits, which you can do by statute, again, with 51, then you bring some sanity back to this process that has become such I would say a partisan grudge match, but as Waj said, it's really wielded only by Republicans to enhance their own power. And you can do an ethics code. You really can do all 3 together, and you should.
Can I say, you made a really good point where Tim Walz said that when we have capital, you have to flex it. I always say when it comes to power, I'll give Republicans respect. They flex it. They don't care. They don't care about public opinion. They don't care if the majority likes it or not. They're like, nope, we're going to give tax cuts to the rich. We don't believe in climate change. We're going to deregulate. We're going to overturn Roe. F you. What are you going to do to us? We have power. Ha ha, cry libs. Democrats actually have this very popular, I think, mandate if they do indeed win. And they have these popular policies, as we've discussed. And finally, I think they realize they need to play hardball. You get rid of the filibuster, because for those who are watching, not in America, but they don't know, you need 60 votes. They're not going to get 60 votes. It's totally divided. So you get rid of the filibuster, you need a simple majority, right? You get 50-50 tiebreaker or 51 votes. You come in day one, get rid of the filibuster. You pass this reform bill. And I say, and so does Sarah, you expand the court. Now, Republicans will whine, they'll complain, it's not fair. Who cares? You're the same ones who denied President Barack Obama Merrick Garland's seat. You made a BS rule out of thin cloth. You denied him a seat. And then when people were already voting, you decided to bum rush Amy Barrett, right? So that's 2 seats that you took that allowed you to bum rush the court with these right-wing extremists and take away our rights. If I'm Democrats, I'm just going to say, this is for the necessary the good of the democracy. We need balance. I would remind them of what Republicans have done. And I think if you, again, you prime the pump, you sell the story, you get people used to it, you get really people who are respected, elected officials, activists, grassroots leaders, to just tell people this is what it is, this is what we need. Fast forward a year from now, you'll have the majority of the people say, yes, do this. So I want them to go on offense, starting from now. And the fact that he did this, beautiful. Beautiful. It would be a great cap to his legacy if people could look back and say, President Biden, of all people, helped initiate much-needed Supreme Court reform.
Can I just jump in on this point about offense, which I think is absolutely 1,000% right? So, minutes maybe after President Biden came out in support of these really common sense good government, necessary reforms. Um, Donald Trump went nuts, and he, lashed out against President Biden. But the way he did that was by hugging the Supreme Court close to him, right? He said, "Oh, our magnificent Supreme Court justices, they're so perfect, and they should take away, more of your rights and take more gifts." That was the subtext. And so it is such a good issue for Democrats because people hate this court, and so it forces Republicans to hug the court even tighter, and that is just so incredibly unpopular.
Lowest favorability rating so far. Only 35 to 38% of Americans respect the Supreme Court. It's a winning issue.
Yeah. Well, to that note, it seems that Democrats, if they so choose, the people are on their side. They have an opportunity here. Biden's proposals seem like a baseline, and we'll have to see where Kamala Harris takes it from here. Thank you both, Wajahat, Sarah, for joining us. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you both have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.